In the waning autumn of 1873, as the final orange leaves fell over the village of Whitbridge, New Jersey, the voices of 12 schoolgirls rang through the halls of St. Cecilia's School for Girls. Their hymn, soft, perfect, sorrowful, was heard echoing from the chapel in the early hours of October 3rd. It was a song no one recognized, a melody none of the instructors had ever taught. Hours later, all 12 were found dead. Their bodies were seated in perfect posture, their mouths slightly open as if the final note still lingered on their lips. There was no sign of violence, no poison in their blood, no explanation except for the torn hymn sheet resting on the pulpit, a sheet containing lyrics written in Latin, a hymn never before published, attributed to no known composer, a hymn that no one else has been able to sing since. This is the true, documented case of St. Cecilia's Choir and the song they sang the night they died. But this story reaches deeper than a single tragic evening. It stretches back through decades of strange occurrences, mysterious benefactors, and a school that should never have existed in the first place. Tonight, we'll explore not just what happened on that October night, but the web of mystery that surrounded St. Cecilia's School from its very foundation. We'll examine the testimonies of survivors, the investigation that followed, and the decades of unexplained phenomena that continue to this day. You're watching Liturgy of Fear, and this is our most thoroughly researched case yet. To understand the tragedy of St. Cecilia's School, we must first understand Whitbridge, New Jersey, a place that existed in the margins of history, forgotten by progress and seemingly untouched by the modern world. In 1873, Whitbridge was barely a village. With a population of under 300, it had no post office, no sheriff, and until 1868, no church. The residents were mostly farmers, loggers, and their families, people who had settled in the dense forests of central New Jersey not for opportunity, but for isolation. The land itself had a peculiar history. Colonial records show that the area was avoided by the Lenape tribes, who referred to it in their oral traditions as the place where songs die. Early Dutch settlers reported strange acoustic phenomena, voices that seemed to come from beneath the earth, echoes that lasted far longer than they should have, and an oppressive silence that would fall over the forest at certain times of the year. By the 1860s, Whitbridge had developed a reputation among the scattered communities of central New Jersey. Travelers avoided it. The few roads that passed through were poorly maintained, as if the state itself had forgotten this pocket of woodland existed. Those who did visit reported an unsettling quality to the place, a sense that sounds behaved differently here, that whispers carried further than they should, and that silence itself seemed to have weight. It was into this isolated, acoustically strange environment that St. Cecilia's School for Girls appeared in 1868. The building seemed to materialize almost overnight, its elaborate stone construction utterly out of place among the simple wooden structures of the village, Romanesque arches, imported limestone, stained glass windows depicting the martyrdom of St. Cecilia, patron saint of music. It was a cathedral disguised as a school, funded by sources that would remain mysterious for decades. The official story was that a small European order of Catholic sisters had chosen this remote location to establish a school for young girls, focusing on music and Latin liturgy. But even from the beginning, nothing about St. Cecilia's School made sense. Why would a religious order choose such an isolated location? Why focus on musical education in a place where few families could afford such luxuries? And why build something so elaborate, so expensive, in a village that most maps didn't even acknowledge existed? The local Presbyterian minister, Reverend Samuel Moorcock, was one of the few who questioned the school's arrival. In a letter to his brother, dated September 1868, he wrote, "These Catholic sisters speak of education, but I have seen no books delivered to their door. I have seen no normal school supplies, only musical instruments, dozens of them, and great boxes of sheet music marked with symbols I do not recognize. When I attempted to visit and introduce myself as a fellow servant of the Lord, I was told that the sisters were in perpetual contemplation and could not receive callers. Yet every night, I hear them singing, not hymns I recognize, but something else entirely, something that makes my wife weep without knowing why. The villagers, initially suspicious of the Catholic presence, gradually became accustomed to the school's existence. The sisters rarely ventured into the village, but they paid their bills promptly, in gold coins that bore no recognizable mint marks. They employed local men for groundskeeping and maintenance, though these workers were required to sign documents promising absolute discretion about anything they might see or hear on the premises. Thomas Grigsby, who would later become the groundskeeper present during the tragedy, was one of these early employees. In an interview conducted in 1901, years after the school's closure, he recalled, "They paid well, better than any farm work I could find, but it was strange work. I was told never to enter the main building during certain hours, never to approach the chapel during evening prayers, and never, under any circumstances, to interrupt the girls if I heard them singing. There were nights when I'd be working in the garden and hear voices coming from the chapel, not just the sisters, but younger voices too, beautiful voices, but they made me feel wrong, like I was hearing something I shouldn't be hearing." St. Cecilia's school began accepting students in the fall of 1868. The first class consisted of only 8 girls, all from wealthy families in Philadelphia and New York. The school's reputation spread quickly among certain circles, not through advertising, but through whispered recommendations at exclusive social gatherings. The curriculum was unlike anything offered at other girls' schools of the era. While most institutions focused on practical skills like needlework, household management, and basic literacy, St. Cecilia's emphasized music theory, Latin composition, and what they called liturgical arts. The girls learned to read ancient musical notation, to sing in languages that predated modern Romance tongues, and to understand the mathematical relationships between sound, silence, and what the sisters called the spaces between notes. Parents who sent their daughters to St. Cecilia's were told they were providing their children with the finest musical education available in America. The school's brochure, printed on expensive paper and distributed only to select families, promised that graduates would possess voices trained in the ancient traditions, capable of reaching spiritual heights unavailable to those educated in secular methods. But from the beginning, there were troubling signs. Parents who visited the school reported that their daughters seemed different, not unhappy, exactly, but distant. They spoke less frequently about their friends, their studies, their daily activities. Instead, they talked obsessively about music, not popular songs or classical pieces, but about concepts that seemed beyond their years. Margaret Thornfield, whose daughter attended St. Cecilia's in 1869, wrote in her diary, "Emma has been at the school for 6 months now, and when she returned for Christmas, I barely recognized her. She has grown thin, pale, but there is something luminous about her eyes." She speaks constantly of her music lessons, of Sister Adela's special teachings, of harmonies that she says exist beyond the physical world. When I asked her to play some of her favorite pieces on our piano, she simply stared at the keys and said, "These notes are too small, Mother. They cannot contain what I need to express." What does a 13-year-old girl know of such things? The school's isolation contributed to its air of mystery. Parents were discouraged from visiting frequently, being told that constant interruptions disrupted the girls' spiritual and musical development. Letters from students were infrequent and often contained unusual phrases, references to musical concepts that seemed advanced beyond their years. Dr. William Harrington, a Philadelphia physician whose daughter attended St. Cecilia's in 1870, became increasingly concerned about the school's methods. In a letter to his colleague, he wrote, "I am a man of science, not given to superstition, but I must confess that my daughter's education at St. Cecilia's has produced effects I cannot explain. She has developed perfect pitch, an ability to sing in keys that do not exist on our piano, and a disturbing tendency to hum melodies that seem to affect anyone who hears them. My wife has begun having vivid dreams after listening to Sarah's practice sessions. The servants have complained of feeling pulled toward the music room when she sings. I am considering removing her from the school, despite the considerable expense involved." The school's influence extended beyond its students. Village residents began reporting changes in their own relationship with sound and music. The local church choir, which had struggled for years to maintain proper harmony, suddenly found themselves singing with unprecedented unity. But this improvement came with the cost. Choir members reported having shared dreams about singing in a vast, dark cathedral that none of them recognized. Children in the village began spontaneously singing songs they claimed to have learned from the ladies in the big house, though no one could identify the source of these melodies. Parents found these songs disturbing, not because they were inappropriate, but because they seemed to bypass conscious thought and lodge directly in the listener's mind. In the spring of 1871, the school's administration underwent a significant change. The original Mother Superior, a woman known only as Sister Benedetta, departed suddenly, leaving behind only a brief note stating that she had been called to serve elsewhere. Her replacement was a figure who would become central to the St. Cecilia's mystery, Mother Adela. Unlike the previous sisters, Mother Adela was not reclusive. She occasionally ventured into the village, spoke with local residents, and even attended services at the Presbyterian church. But her presence was unsettling in ways that people struggled to articulate. Reverend Moorcock, who had several conversations with Mother Adela, described her in his journal. She is a woman of perhaps 40 years, though her appearance suggests both great youth and ancient wisdom. Her Latin is flawless, but she speaks it with an accent I cannot place. When I quoted scripture to her, she responded with verses I do not recognize, though she claims they are from the same source. Most disturbing of all, when she speaks, her words seem to linger in the air long after she has finished speaking, as if the very atmosphere is reluctant to release them. Mother Adela brought with her a new intensity to the school's musical program. She instituted longer practice sessions, more complex compositions, and what she called advanced harmonic studies. She also began selecting certain students for special training, girls who showed particular aptitude for what she termed transcendent vocal techniques. The village doctor, Dr. Edmund Carlisle, met Mother Adela during a medical examination of one of the students. In his notes, he recorded, "The woman claims to be a trained educator, but her knowledge of human anatomy, particularly of the vocal apparatus, is extraordinarily advanced. She spoke of vocal cord vibrations, resonance chambers, and breath control techniques that are beyond current medical understanding." When I asked where she had acquired such knowledge, she simply smiled and said, "The human voice is capable of far more than your science recognizes, Doctor. We are merely helping our students realize their full potential." Mother Adela's methods extended beyond conventional musical education. She introduced the girls to what she called meditative singing, extended sessions where students would sing the same melodic phrases for hours, entering what appeared to be trance-like states. Parents who witnessed these sessions during their infrequent visits reported that the girls seemed to be singing in perfect unison without any apparent effort, their voices blending into a single, ethereal sound. The school's reputation continued to grow, but so did the whispers about its unconventional methods. Former students who had graduated and returned to normal society often struggled to readjust. They complained that ordinary music sounded flat or incomplete compared to what they had learned at St. Cecilia's. Some developed what physicians of the time called melancholic disorders, periods of profound sadness that seemed to be triggered by hearing certain musical intervals. In the autumn of 1872, Mother Adela announced the formation of a special choir, a select group of 12 girls who would receive the most advanced musical training the school could provide. The selection process was mysterious. There were no auditions, no parental consultations, no academic requirements. Mother Adela simply announced the chosen girls during morning prayers, stating that they had been called by their voices to serve a higher purpose. The 12 girls were Anne Wilshire, age 12, Clara Donnelly, 13, Evelyn Blackmore, 12, Margaret Crane, 14, Beatrice Lang, 12, Eleanor Wright, 13, Isabel Sutton, 13, Louisa March, 14, Mary Catherine Holmes, 12, Violet Lennox, 13, Ruth Vandermeer, 14, and Abigail Gray, 14. These girls were immediately set apart from the rest of the student body. They were moved to a separate dormitory in the school's east wing, given different uniforms of deep blue rather than the standard gray, and excused from many regular classes to focus on their musical studies. They ate their meals together in a private dining room, attended special chapel services, and were rarely seen interacting with other students. The other students at St. Cecilia's began to speak of the chosen 12 with a mixture of awe and unease. Fellow student Catherine Morse, who left the school in early 1873, later recalled, "They were like they were becoming something else, not different in any way you could point to, but when you looked at them, you felt like you were looking at someone who was already halfway to somewhere else. They moved differently, spoke differently. Even their breathing seemed to have a rhythm that the rest of us couldn't match. The special Choirs training regimen was intense and secretive. They practiced for hours each day, often late into the night. Other students reported hearing their voices through the walls, not individual voices, but a single, perfect harmonic sound that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the building." Letters from the chosen girls to their families became increasingly unusual, and Wilshire wrote to her mother, "The music we are learning is not like the songs you know. Mother Adela says we are learning to sing with the voice that exists beyond the physical throat, to create harmonies that can bridge the gap between earth and heaven. I am beginning to understand what she means when we sing together. I feel as though I am dissolving into the music itself." Clara Donnelly's letter home was even more disturbing. "Please do not worry about my health, though I know I must look different when you see me. The music is changing us, but in a wonderful way. We are learning to use our voices as instruments of transformation. Mother Adela says that true singers do not merely make sounds, they become the music they create. I am so excited to show you what we can do." Parents who received these letters were naturally concerned, but their attempts to visit the school or speak with their daughters were discouraged. Mother Adela explained that the girls were at a crucial stage in their development and that outside influences could disrupt their progress. The village began to notice changes as well. The nightly singing from the school became more frequent and more intense. Residents reported that the sound seemed to carry much further than it should have, reaching homes miles away with crystal clarity. Some villagers began experiencing shared dreams, visions of a vast choir singing in a cathedral that seemed to be constructed entirely of sound and light. As the special Choirs training intensified, questions about the school's funding became more pressing. The expenses involved in maintaining such an elaborate institution, with its imported materials, specialized instruments, and extensive staff, should have been enormous. Yet the school never seemed to struggle financially, and there were persistent rumors about mysterious benefactors who provided support from abroad. Local banker Henry Whitmore, who handled some of the school's financial transactions, noted several irregularities. In a confidential letter to his business partner, he wrote, "The payments from St. Cecilia's are always made in gold coins, but not any gold coins I recognize. The metal is purer than standard currency, and the markings are unlike anything from European or American mints." When I asked Mother Adela about their origin, she simply said they came from old accounts and offered no further explanation. The school's correspondence also raised questions. The postmaster in nearby Millville reported that St. Cecilia's received regular mail from addresses that didn't seem to exist. Letters arrived with postmarks from cities he couldn't locate on any map, written in languages that local scholars couldn't identify. Dr. Francis Hemingway, a professor of languages at Princeton University, was consulted about some of these letters after they were accidentally delivered to the wrong address. His analysis was troubling. The script appears to be Latin, but it contains grammatical structures that predate classical Latin by centuries. Some of the characters are recognizable as early Christian symbols, but others bear no resemblance to any known writing system. Most disturbing of all, there are mathematical notations interspersed with the text, complex equations that seem to relate to acoustic theory, but using principles that are beyond current scientific understanding. The school's library also contained books that shouldn't have existed. Father Michael O'Brien, a Catholic priest who visited the school in 1873, noted, "Their collection includes manuscripts that I have never seen mentioned in any catalog. ancient treatises on music theory, handwritten hymns attributed to saints who died centuries ago, and texts that claim to contain the lost melodies of early Christian worship. When I asked Mother Adela where these books had come from, she told me they were family heirlooms passed down through generations of sisters. But some of these texts appear to be written on parchment that should have deteriorated centuries ago. The instruments used by the special choir were equally mysterious. While the school's main music room contained conventional pianos and organs, the special choir practiced with instruments that seemed to have been crafted according to unusual specifications. The organ in their private chapel had keys that produced sounds at frequencies that seemed to affect listeners, physically causing headaches, vertigo, and in some cases, vivid hallucinations. Thomas Grigsby, the groundskeeper, reported seeing deliveries of what appeared to be additional musical instruments throughout 1873. But these deliveries occurred at night, and the men who brought them spoke in languages he didn't recognize. They moved like they were carrying something sacred, he recalled, and the boxes they brought, they hummed, not loud, but you could feel it in your bones when you got close to them. As 1873 progressed, the phenomena surrounding St. Cecilia's school became increasingly difficult to ignore. The special choir's nightly practice sessions began to produce effects that extended far beyond the school's walls. Animals in the surrounding forest began exhibiting unusual behavior. Birds would fall silent when the singing began, not returning to their normal calls until hours after the music had stopped. Horses in the village became restless during the choir's practice sessions, and several dogs were reported to howl in harmony with the distant singing. Dr. Carlisle, the village physician, began documenting what he termed sympathetic responses among the local population. In his medical journal, he wrote, "I have treated 7 cases this month of what I can only describe as musical malady. Patients report being unable to get certain melodies out of their minds, not popular songs, but complex harmonies that seem to originate from the direction of the school. These melodies cause physical symptoms, headaches, nausea, and in cases, temporary loss of speech. Most disturbing is that all 7 patients hum the same melody, despite claiming never to have heard it before." The effect on the village's children was particularly pronounced. Several parents reported that their children had begun singing songs they couldn't possibly have learned elsewhere. These songs were sung in Latin, with melodies that seemed to require vocal ranges beyond what young children should possess. Martha Hollings, a village resident, described an incident involving her 7-year-old daughter. Little Sarah came home from playing in the woods, singing the most beautiful song I'd ever heard. But when I asked her where she'd learned it, she looked confused and said she didn't remember singing anything. I tried to get her to sing it again, but she claimed she didn't know the words. Yet that night, I heard her singing it in her sleep, the same melody, the same Latin words, sung with perfect pronunciation. When I woke her, she had no memory of it. The acoustic properties of the area around the school seemed to be changing. Sounds carried differently. Whispers could be heard clearly from impossible distances, while shouts sometimes seemed to be absorbed by the air itself. The local church bell, which had rung clearly for decades, began producing a muffled, distorted sound that residents found deeply unsettling. Reverend Moorcock documented several incidents in his journal. The very air around St. Cecilia's seems to have become thicker. When I walk past the school grounds, my voice sounds strange to my own ears. Words seem to hang in the air longer than they should, and I have the constant sensation that I am being listened to by unseen ears. Yesterday, while walking near the school's chapel, I heard what I can only describe as an echo of my own voice, singing hymns I don't remember singing, in a language I don't recognize. The school's influence on weather patterns also became apparent. Village residents noted that fog seemed to gather around the school with unusual frequency, and that this fog carried sounds with unusual clarity. On foggy nights, the choir's singing could be heard throughout the village, despite the fact that fog should have muffled the sound. As October 1873 approached, the behavior of the special choir became increasingly unusual. The girls seemed to be in an almost constant state of preparation for something, though what that something was remained unclear to everyone except Mother Adela. Other students at the school reported that the chosen 12 had become almost ghostly in their presence. They moved through the halls silently, rarely spoke except to each other, and seemed to exist in a state of constant, quiet anticipation when they did speak. Their voices had taken on an unusual quality or resonance that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than their throats. Catherine Morse, who left the school on September 20th, later provided the most detailed account of the Choyers' final weeks. They had changed completely by then, not just in the way they looked, though they had all become very thin and pale. It was like they were becoming transparent. You could look at them and feel like you were seeing through them to something else, and their voices when they spoke seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The regular students began experiencing disturbing dreams. Multiple girls reported the same recurring nightmare. They were standing in a vast cathedral, made of sound, watching the special choir sing while their bodies gradually dissolved into the music itself. These dreams were so vivid that many students began refusing to sleep, leading to a state of exhaustion that affected the entire school. Mother Adela's behavior also became increasingly erratic. She began conducting private meetings with each member of the special choir, sessions that lasted for hours, and from which the girls would emerge in a state of exaltation. She also began making cryptic announcements during morning prayers, speaking of the approaching culmination and the fulfillment of purpose. The school's correspondence with the outside world virtually ceased. Letters to parents became less frequent and more disturbing. Beatrice Lang wrote to her father, "We are so close now to achieving what we have been working toward. Mother Adela says that we are about to become something that has never existed before, a perfect instrument of divine music. I know this may be difficult to understand, but please trust that this is what I was meant to do. The music has shown me truths that I could never have discovered any other way." Local residents began avoiding the area around the school entirely. The singing that emanated from the building each night had become so intense that it caused physical discomfort to anyone who ventured too close. Several villagers reported feeling compelled to walk toward the school during these sessions, as if the music was pulling them forward against their will. Thomas Grigsby, the groundskeeper, noticed that the school's staff had begun to change. The sisters, who had worked there for years, seemed to have developed the same otherworldly quality as the special choir. They moved with purpose, but without apparent awareness of their surroundings, and their conversations consisted entirely of discussions about music theory and spiritual preparation. On the evening of October 2, 1873, Mother Adela made an unprecedented announcement. She ordered all students except the special choir to remain in their dormitories for the night, explaining that the culmination of our work requires complete silence from all but those who have been prepared. The regular students were given laudanum to help them sleep, administered by the sisters with an insistence that bordered on compulsion. Those who resisted were told that failure to comply would result in immediate expulsion from the school. As night fell, an unusual silence settled over the building. The normal sounds of a functioning school, footsteps in the corridors, whispered conversations, the settling of old wood, all seemed to have been absorbed by the air itself. The only sounds that remained were the distant voices of the special choir, preparing for what would be their final performance. Thomas Grigsby, who was working late in the garden, reported that the atmosphere around the school had become almost electric. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm, he later recalled, but heavier, more charged. Every sound seemed to carry weight, and the singing from the chapel was so clear it might have been happening right next to me. At approximately 13 a.m., Grigsby heard the choir begin their final hymn. The sound was unlike anything he had ever experienced, 12 voices singing in perfect unison, but creating harmonies that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond normal hearing. The music seemed to come from the chapel, from the air itself, from inside his own mind. Compelled by a force he couldn't resist, Grigsby approached the chapel. As he drew closer, the music became more intense, more beautiful, and more terrifying. He later described it as the sound of heaven and hell singing together, creating something that shouldn't exist in the world of the living. When he reached the chapel door, he found it slightly ajar. The singing was at its peak now, a sound so perfect and so otherworldly that it seemed to be reshaping reality around it. But when Grigsby reached out to push the door open, he found that he couldn't touch it, though it would seem to burn his hand, though there was no heat, no flame, only a sensation of touching something that existed beyond the physical world. Terrified, Grigsby fled to his cottage and remained there until dawn, listening to the singing that continued throughout the night. The music reached a crescendo just before sunrise, then stopped so suddenly that the silence that followed seemed to echo with the ghost of the melody. At dawn on October 3, 1873, Mother Adela herself summoned Dr. Carlyle to the school. She met him at the front door, her face bearing an expression of profound peace mixed with exhaustion. "Doctor," she said simply, "we have achieved what we set out to accomplish, but I fear the cost has been greater than anticipated." Dr. Carlyle was led to the chapel, where he found the 12 members of the special choir seated in the front pews. They were arranged in perfect formation, their hands folded in their laps, their faces turned slightly upward as if listening to some distant music. Their eyes were open, their mouths slightly parted, and their bodies maintained perfect posture. None of them were breathing. Dr. Carlyle's initial examination revealed no obvious cause of death. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication of disease or poison. The girls appeared to have simply stopped, but there were unusual details that troubled him greatly. Each girl's tongue had turned completely black, though there was no sign of poisoning or disease that would cause such a symptom. Their fingernails had grown noticeably longer overnight, and their skin had taken on a translucent quality that seemed to glow faintly in the chapel's dim light. Most disturbing of all, when Dr. Carlyle checked for vital signs, he found that, while the girls had no heartbeat and were not breathing, their bodies remained warm. There was no rigor mortis, no signs of the physical changes that normally accompany death. On the altar, he found a single sheet of music, written in reddish ink on parchment that seemed to be made from some unknown material. The sheet was half burned along the edges, and the musical notation was unlike anything in his limited knowledge of music theory. Mother Adela stood behind him as he examined the scene, her presence radiating in strange calm. When he turned to question her, she simply said, "They have achieved transcendence, Doctor. They have become the music they were meant to sing. Death is merely a doorway for those who have learned to use their voices as instruments of transformation." The authorities were summoned immediately, though the nearest sheriff was a day's ride away. By the time Sheriff William Hargrove arrived from Millville, the school had undergone a dramatic transformation. The remaining students had been quietly removed during the night, returned to their families with explanations that the school was temporarily closing due to unforeseen circumstances. The sisters who had staffed the school had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only their habits and a sense that they had never truly existed at all. Mother Adela remained to speak with the investigators, but her answers raised more questions than they resolved. When asked about the choir's final performance, she spoke of completing a work that had been in preparation for centuries, of voices that had been trained to bridge the gap between mortal and divine, and of a sacrifice that would preserve the sacred music for future generations. The coroner's examination of the 12 girls was inconclusive. Dr. Harold Fitzpatrick, brought in from Newark, found no medical explanation for their deaths. His report, filed with the state authorities, noted the subjects appear to have died simultaneously, though the cause remains unknown. Physical examination reveals no trauma, no signs of poisoning, no evidence of disease. Most unusual is the fact that normal decomposition processes have not begun. Despite the passage of several days, the bodies remain in perfect condition, as if death had occurred only moments before. The investigation revealed several disturbing facts about the school's history. Financial records showed that the institution had received funding from sources that couldn't be verified. The educational certifications of the sisters were either missing or bore seals from organizations that didn't appear to exist. Most troubling of all, there was no record of the school's legal establishment, no permits, no inspections, no official recognition from state or church authorities. Sheriff Hargrove's report noted, St. Cecilia's school appears to have operated outside all normal legal and educational frameworks. Its existence seems to have been known only to the families who sent their daughters there and to T. He immediate community. There are no records of its establishment in state files, no correspondence with educational authorities, no documentation of its curriculum or staff qualifications. The mysterious hymn sheet found on the altar became the focus of intense scholarly investigation. The parchment itself was unlike any material known to contemporary experts. It seemed to be made from some form of treated skin, but from no animal that could be identified. The musical notation was equally puzzling. While the basic structure resembled standard musical writing, it contained symbols and markings that had no equivalent in known musical theory. The notes seemed to be arranged in patterns that suggested sounds beyond the range of human hearing, frequencies that couldn't be produced by conventional instruments. Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann, a German musicologist brought in to analyze the sheet, reported, "This composition represents a form of musical notation that predates any known system. The intervals between notes suggest microtonal relationships that are impossible to reproduce with standard instruments. Most disturbing is the fact that the mathematical relationships between the notes correspond to acoustic principles that are beyond current scientific understanding. The lyrics, written in Latin, were equally mysterious. While the language was recognizable, the grammatical structures and vocabulary choices suggested a form of Latin that had been preserved in isolation for centuries." Father Giuseppe Toretti, a Vatican scholar who examined the text, noted, "The Latin is archaic, but perfectly formed. It contains theological concepts that were considered heretical in the early church, mixed with musical terminology that has no precedent in Christian literature." The partial translation of the hymn revealed disturbing themes. The opening lines, roughly translated, read, "O martyr of strings and silence, draw us into your melody. Our voice is your sacrifice, our harmony your offering." The remaining verses spoke of voices that transcend flesh, songs that bridge the mortal and eternal, and music that transforms the singer into the song itself. Multiple attempts were made to perform the hymn, but each ended in failure or disaster. A choir in Philadelphia attempted to sing it in 1874, but 3 members collapsed during the performance, unable to continue. A solo attempt by a trained opera singer in Boston resulted in the performer losing her voice permanently. After singing only the first few measures, the deaths of the 12 girls sent shockwaves through the communities from which they had come. Families who had sent their daughters to St. Cecilia's for what they believed was advanced musical education found themselves grappling with a tragedy that defied explanation, and Wilshire's parents, upon receiving news of their daughter's death, immediately traveled to Whitbridge. Her father, a successful merchant, later wrote, "When we arrived at the school, it was as if we had entered a different world. The building itself seemed to be constructed of silence. Our footsteps echoed strangely. Our voices sounded muffled, and there was a sense that we were being watched by unseen eyes. When they showed us Anne's body, we almost didn't recognize her. She had become beautiful in a way that was not entirely human, as if death had refined her into something more perfect than life had allowed." The families demanded answers, but Mother Adela provided only cryptic responses. She spoke of the girls having fulfilled their highest purpose, of having achieved a form of artistic transcendence that few humans ever reach, and of their deaths being not an ending, but a transformation into something eternal. The local community struggled to process what had occurred in their midst. The Presbyterian Church held a memorial service, but Reverend Moorcock later admitted that he had been unable to find appropriate words to commemorate the girls' deaths. "How do you eulogize children who died in pursuit of something that shouldn't exist?" he wrote in his journal. "How do you comfort families whose daughters were taken by forces that our theology cannot explain?" The burial of the 12 girls presented its own challenges. The families wanted to take their daughters home for proper interment, but the bodies showed no signs of decomposition. Even days after death, Dr. Fitzpatrick advised against moving them, stating that their condition was medically unprecedented and that transportation might cause unknown complications. A compromise was reached. The girls would be buried in a section of the Whitbridge Cemetery that was consecrated specifically for this purpose. Father O'Brien, The Catholic priest who had visited the school performed the ceremony, though he later admitted that he had been forced to modify the traditional funeral rites to accommodate the unusual circumstances. The gravestone inscriptions were deliberately vague, containing only the girls' names and dates of birth and death. No mention was made of St. Cecilia's school or the circumstances of their deaths. The families had agreed that the truth was too disturbing to be preserved in stone, but even in death, the girls seemed to exert a strange influence. Cemetery workers reported that the ground around their graves remained unusually soft, as if it were reluctant to accept the bodies permanently. Flowers planted on the graves grew with supernatural vigor, but bloomed in colors that didn't exist in nature. Most disturbing of all, visitors to the cemetery reported hearing faint singing emanating from the direction of the graves, especially during dawn and dusk hours. Within a week of the investigation's conclusion, the remaining sisters of St. Cecilia's school had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. Mother Adela was the last to be seen, appearing at the Whitbridge General Store on October 10th to settle the school's final accounts. Store owner Jacob Hendricks later described this final encounter. "She came in just as I was closing, paid everything the school owed in gold coins, and thanked me for the community's hospitality. But there was something different about her. She seemed to be fading, becoming less solid with each word she spoke. When I asked what would happen to the school building, she simply smiled and said, 'It will remain until it is no longer needed.' Then she walked out into the evening fog, and that was the last anyone saw of her." The school building itself remained intact but eerily empty. Thomas Grigsby, who had been dismissed from his groundskeeping duties, reported that the building seemed to be maintaining itself. The gardens remained perfectly manicured, the windows stayed clean, and the interior showed no signs of abandonment despite the absence of any caretakers. Local authorities attempted to determine the legal ownership of the property, but their investigations led nowhere. The deed had been registered under the name of an organization that had no legal existence, signed by officials whose identities couldn't be verified. The property seemed to exist in a legal vacuum, owned by no one, and yet somehow protected from seizure or sale. Strange phenomena continued to manifest around the empty school. Residents reported seeing lights in the windows at night, though the electricity had been disconnected. The sound of organ music could be heard emanating from the chapel, despite the fact that the building was securely locked and supposedly empty. Dr. Carlisle, who had been present at the discovery of the bodies, began experiencing disturbing symptoms. In his medical journal, he wrote, "Since entering that chapel, I have been unable to escape the memory of the music I heard there. It plays constantly in my mind, a melody so beautiful and so terrible that it seems to be reshaping my thoughts. Around it, I find myself humming it unconsciously, and when I do, my patients report feeling inexplicably moved to tears." As news of the St. Cecilia's tragedy spread, it attracted the attention of investigators from beyond the local community. The Catholic Church, concerned about the involvement of supposed sisters in such a mysterious incident, dispatched a team of scholars to examine the school's religious credentials. Monsignor Alessandro Torriani, leading the church's investigation, reported, "We have found no record of any religious order matching the description of the sisters. At St. Cecilia's school, the names they used, the habits they wore, the rituals they practiced, none of these correspond to any recognized Catholic religious community. Most disturbing is the discovery that several of the theological concepts they promoted were condemned as heretical by the early church councils. The investigation revealed that the school's library contained texts that shouldn't have existed in any Catholic institution. Ancient manuscripts described musical practices that were associated with Gnostic sects, mystery religions, and occult traditions that predated Christianity. The books were written in languages that combined Latin with symbols from much older spiritual traditions. Father Toretti's report continued, "The theological foundation of St. Cecilia's school appears to have been based on the heretical belief that the human voice can be used as a tool for literal transcendence, that through proper musical training, an individual can use sound to separate their soul from their physical body. This concept appears nowhere in Orthodox Christian doctrine." and bears disturbing similarities to practices condemned by the early church. Secular authorities also became involved. The New Jersey State Board of Education launched an investigation into how an unlicensed school had operated for years without oversight. Their findings were deeply troubling. Not only had St. Cecilia's never been properly registered, but the families who had sent their daughters there had done so based on recommendations from sources that couldn't be traced. Dr. Samuel Whitmore, leading the state investigation, noted the school appears to have recruited students through an informal network of wealthy families who shared certain interests. These families were told that St. Cecilia's offered a form of musical education that was unavailable anywhere else in America. The recruiting process was so subtle that many parents couldn't remember exactly how they had learned about the school. As the investigation continued, authorities tracked down students who had attended St. Cecilia's school but had left before the tragedy. Their testimonies provided crucial insights into the school's true nature and the gradual transformation of the special choir. Catherine Morse, who had left the school in September 1873, provided the most detailed account. Looking back, I can see that the school was never really about education in the normal sense. It was about finding girls who had a particular kind of voice, a particular sensitivity to music. The sisters would listen to us sing, and you could see them making notes about which girls had potential. The chosen 12 were different from the beginning. They heard music differently than the rest of us. When we sang hymns in chapel, they would sometimes harmonize with melodies that weren't being played. They claimed they could hear deeper layers in the music, sounds that existed underneath the notes we were actually singing. As their special training progressed, they began to change, not just in how they looked, though they did become very pale and thin. It was more like they were becoming less solid. You could look at them and feel like you were seeing through them to something else. And their voices, when they sang together, created sounds that I still hear in my dreams. Margaret Henley, who had attended the school in 1871, described earlier incidents that foreshadowed the tragedy. Even in my time there were strange things happening. Girls would sometimes sing in their sleep, perfectly complex melodies in languages none of us recognized. The sisters would find them in the morning, still asleep but sitting upright in their beds, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously. Mother Adela would always be very interested in these incidents. She would take the girls aside for private conversations, and they would come back changed, not unhappy, but distant, like they had been told secrets that separated them from the rest of us. Emma Blackwood, who had left the school in 1872, provided insight into the school's teaching methods. The music lessons were unlike anything I had experienced before. We weren't just learning to sing notes, we were learning to sing with our entire beings. Mother Adela would talk about using our voices as instruments of transformation, about music that could change the singer as much as the listener. She taught us breathing techniques that seemed to alter our consciousness. During long practice sessions, I would sometimes lose awareness of my physical body entirely, feeling as though I had become part of the music itself. The experience was intoxicating, but also terrifying. I began to worry that I was losing myself in the music, that if I continued, I might never find my way back to being simply human. The investigation into St. Cecilia's school attracted the attention of scientists interested in the acoustic phenomena that had been reported. Dr. Marcus Steinbeck, a professor of physics at Columbia University, traveled to Whitbridge to study the properties of sound around the school. His findings were groundbreaking and disturbing. The acoustic properties of the area around St. Cecilia's school are unlike anything I have encountered in my career, he reported. Sound behaves differently here. It carries further, resonates longer, and seems to interact with the physical environment in ways that challenge our understanding of physics. I have measured sound waves that appear to exist at frequencies beyond the range of human hearing, yet they clearly affect anyone who enters the area. These infrasonic and ultrasonic vibrations seem to be embedded in the very structure of the building, as if the stone itself has been tuned to act as a massive resonating chamber. Dr. Steinbeck's experiments revealed that the school's chapel was constructed according to acoustic principles that were far more advanced than anything known to 19th century architecture. The dimensions of the room, the angles of the walls, the materials used in construction all were precisely calculated to amplify and focus sound in ways that created profound psychological effects on listeners. The chapel appears to have been designed as a kind of acoustic weapon. Dr. Steinbeck wrote in his report, "The geometry of the space creates standing wave patterns that can induce altered states of consciousness, emotional responses, and even physical symptoms in those who spend extended periods within it." The 12 girls who died were essentially victims of a form of acoustic manipulation that we are only beginning to understand. The musical instruments found in the school were equally mysterious. An analysis of the special Troyer's organ revealed that it had been modified to produce sounds at frequencies that don't exist in normal musical scales. The pipes had been tuned to create microtonal intervals that could generate beats and resonances WITH the human nervous system. The organ has been transformed into something that is no longer merely a musical instrument. Dr. Steinbeck observed, "It has become a device for producing sounds that can directly affect human consciousness." The girls who used it were not simply making music, they were using sound as a tool for altering their own neurological states. In 1875, renovation work on the empty school building led to the discovery of a hidden room behind the chapel's altar. The room contained a collection of manuscripts, books, and musical notation that provided crucial insights into the school's true purpose. The manuscripts were written in multiple languages, including Latin, Greek, and scripts that scholars couldn't identify. They described musical practices that had been developed by various occult and mystical traditions over centuries, all focused on the concept of using sound as a means of spiritual transformation. Dr. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, a scholar of ancient languages brought in to translate the manuscripts, reported, "These texts describe a form of musical practice that was considered dangerous by Orthodox religious authorities throughout history. The techniques described are designed to use the human voice as a tool for achieving what the manuscripts call sonic transcendence, the ability to separate consciousness from physical form through precise vocal techniques." The manuscripts make clear that this practice was considered so dangerous that it was repeatedly suppressed by religious and secular authorities. The texts describe numerous historical incidents where practitioners of these techniques died during their attempts to achieve transcendence. The 12 girls at St. Cecilia's school were not the first victims of these practices. They were simply the most recent. Among the manuscripts was a detailed account of the school's establishment, written in Mother Adela's hand. The document revealed that St. Cecilia's School had been founded not for educational purposes, but as an experimental facility designed to test the limits of human vocal abilities. The manuscript describes a centuries-old organization dedicated to preserving and developing these dangerous musical techniques. Dr. Fitzpatrick noted, "The school was established as a controlled environment where young voices could be trained and tested. The girls who attended were not students in the conventional sense, they were subjects in an experiment that was designed to determine whether human beings could use music to transcend their physical limitations." The manuscript also contained detailed instructions for the Cantus Ultimus, the final song that had killed the 12 girls. The instructions made clear that the song was not meant to be performed by living voices, but was designed to serve as a bridge between life and death, allowing the singers to carry their music with them into whatever realm lay beyond physical existence. The investigation into St. Cecilia's School revealed that it was not an isolated incident. Research into historical records uncovered similar events throughout history, all involving groups of singers who had died under mysterious circumstances while performing unknown musical compositions. Dr. James Hartwell, a historian at Harvard University, compiled a comprehensive study of these incidents. His research revealed a disturbing pattern throughout recorded history. There have been numerous accounts of singers who died while performing music that was described as transcendent or otherworldly. These incidents occur across different cultures and time periods, but they share common characteristics. The singers die simultaneously. Their bodies show no signs of trauma. and the music they were performing is subsequently considered too dangerous to reproduce. The earliest recorded incident occurred in 4th century Rome, where a group of Christian singers died while performing a hymn that they claimed had been revealed to them in a vision. Similar incidents were recorded in medieval monasteries, Renaissance courts, and 18th century musical academies. The pattern suggests that there has been a long-standing tradition of musical experimentation designed to test the limits of human vocal ability. Dr. Hartwell noted, the practitioners of these techniques appear to have been organized into secret societies or religious orders that preserved and developed these dangerous practices across generations. The research revealed that many of these incidents were followed by the mysterious disappearance of the surviving practitioners, just as had occurred at St. Cecilia's school. In each case, the organizations responsible for the experiments would vanish, leaving behind only cryptic records and empty buildings. The similarity of these incidents across different time periods and cultures suggests that we are dealing with a persistent tradition rather than isolated occurrences. Dr. Hartwell concluded, the organization responsible for St. Cecilia's school appears to be part of a much larger network that has been conducting these experiments for centuries. After the tragedy, St. Cecilia's school building remained empty but somehow maintained. Local residents reported that the structure seemed to be preserving itself. The stonework remained solid, the windows stayed intact, and the gardens continued to bloom despite the absence of any caretakers. The building became a source of fascination and fear for the local community. Children would dare each other to approach the school at night, but few were brave enough to actually touch the building. Those who did reported that the stone walls felt warm to the touch, as if some form of energy was flowing through them. Strange phenomena continued to manifest around the empty school. Residents reported seeing lights in the windows at night, though the building had no electricity. The sound of organ music could be heard emanating from the chapel, despite the fact that the building was securely locked and supposedly empty. Thomas Grigsby, the former groundskeeper, made regular visits to the property despite no longer being employed there. In his journal, he wrote, "The building calls to me in a way I cannot explain. When I walk through the halls, I can hear echoes of the girls' voices, still singing their final song. The chapel, in particular, seems to be alive with music that has no earthly source." Several attempts were made to repurpose the building, but all ended in failure. A group of investors tried to convert it into a hotel in 1878, but the construction workers reported feeling overwhelmed by inexplicable sadness. Whenever they entered the building, the project was abandoned after 3 workers suffered nervous breakdowns. In 1882, the Catholic Church attempted to reclaim the building for use as a traditional convent, but the nuns who were sent to establish the community lasted only 2 weeks. They reported that the building was saturated with sounds that should not exist, and that attempting to pray within its walls felt like trying to worship in the presence of something that denied the existence of God. By 1900, the empty school building had become a source of persistent anxiety for the Whitbridge community. The strange phenomena continued unabated, and the building's presence seemed to be affecting the mental health of local residents. Dr. Carlyle, who had never fully recovered from his experience in the chapel, led a campaign to have the building demolished. In a letter to the state authorities, he wrote, "The structure that once housed St. Cecilia's school has become a monument to forces that should not exist in our world. Its continued presence is a danger to the psychological well-being of our community and a reminder of tragedies that are better forgotten." The demolition was authorized in 1901, but the process proved to be more difficult than anyone had anticipated. The building seemed to resist destruction with an almost supernatural persistence. Stone walls that should have crumbled under sledgehammers remained intact. Windows that were shattered would somehow reform themselves overnight. The demolition crew, led by foreman Patrick O'Malley, reported increasingly disturbing experiences as the work progressed. "Every time we removed a stone, we could hear music coming from inside the walls," O'Malley wrote in his report. "Not loud music, but clear as if someone was singing right next to your ear." Some of the men claimed they could hear the voices of the 12 girls, still singing their final song. The most disturbing incident occurred when the crew attempted to demolish the chapel. As they began removing stones from the altar area, they reported hearing a single organ note that seemed to come from the building itself. The note continued for hours, growing louder and more insistent, until several workers collapsed from the psychological strain. O'Malley himself suffered what appeared to be a nervous breakdown during the chapel demolition. His final report stated, "The building does not want to be destroyed. It knows what we are trying to do, and it is fighting back. The music that comes from the walls is not random, it is organized, purposeful, as if the building itself has learned to sing." The demolition of St. Cecilia's School was eventually completed in late 1901, but not without significant cost. 3 members of the demolition crew suffered permanent psychological damage, and 2 others left the area and never returned. The final phase of demolition required the use of dynamite, as conventional tools had proven inadequate against the building's mysterious resistance. Even the explosives seemed to have reduced effectiveness. Walls that should have been completely destroyed by the blasts remained partially intact, requiring multiple charges to complete the demolition. As the building was finally reduced to rubble, witnesses reported a sound that none of them would ever forget. Dr. Carlisle, who had insisted on being present for the final demolition, described it in his journal. "As the last wall fell, we heard what can only be described as a final chord, 12 voices singing in perfect harmony, rising in pitch until it passed beyond human hearing. The sound seemed to come from the rubble itself, as if the stones were singing their own requiem." The cleanup of the demolition site revealed additional mysteries. Workers found rooms and passages that had not appeared in any of the school's architectural plans. Hidden chambers contained musical instruments that had been modified in ways that defied explanation, and collections of sheet music written in notation systems that no one could decipher. Most disturbing of all was the discovery of a basement chamber that seemed to have been designed as an acoustic laboratory. The room contained apparatus that appeared to be designed for measuring and manipulating sound waves, along with detailed charts showing the effects of different musical frequencies on human physiology. The basement laboratory suggests that St. Cecilia's School was not simply a place where dangerous musical techniques were taught, noted Dr. Steinbeck, who examined the discovered equipment. It was a research facility where the effects of sound on human consciousness were being studied with scientific precision. The 12 girls who died were not just victims of a misguided educational experiment, they were subjects in a form of acoustic research that was far more advanced than anything known to contemporary science. Even after the demolition of St. Cecilia's School, the mysteries surrounding the institution continued to unfold. The land where the school had stood remained empty, as attempts to build on the site were plagued by inexplicable problems. In 1903, a local businessman attempted to construct a warehouse on the former school grounds, but the project was abandoned after workers reported that their tools would mysteriously disappear and reappear in arrangements that resembled musical notation. The foundation that had been laid began to crack in patterns that, when viewed from above, resembled the staff lines of sheet music. The cemetery where the 12 girls had been buried became a site of pilgrimage for people interested in the supernatural. Visitors reported that the graves seemed to emanate a faint humming sound, especially during dawn and dusk hours. Flowers placed on the graves would arrange themselves in patterns that resembled musical symbols, and some visitors claimed to hear whispered voices speaking in Latin. Dr. Carlisle, who had become something of an expert on the St. Cecilia's case, continued to study the incident until his death in 1912. His final paper, published posthumously, contained a chilling conclusion. The events at St. Cecilia's School represent not an isolated tragedy, but a successful experiment in a form of research that has been conducted for centuries. The 12 girls who died achieved exactly what their instructors intended. They became living instruments of transcendence, using their voices to bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual realms. The paper also contained Dr. Carlisle's theory about the true nature of the organization behind the school. The evidence suggests that we are dealing with a secret society that has preserved and developed dangerous acoustic techniques across generations. This organization appears to be dedicated to the belief that human consciousness can be permanently altered through precise manipulation of sound waves. The school was not an educational institution. It was a laboratory for testing the limits of human vocal ability. In 1908, the surviving evidence from St. Cecilia's School was transferred to the archives of St. Elizabeth Seminary in Morristown, New Jersey, where it remains under restricted access to this day. The collection includes the original hymn sheet, fragments of the school's musical manuscripts, and testimonies from survivors and investigators. Father Michael Brennan, who served as the seminary's archivist from 1910 to 1945, documented numerous strange incidents related to the preserved materials. In his records, he noted, "The manuscript collection from St. Cecilia's School exerts a disturbing influence on anyone who spends extended time studying it." Researchers report hearing phantom music while examining the documents, and several have claimed to see the ghostly figures of young girls in the archive reading room. The most dangerous item in the collection remains the original hymn sheet, the Cantus Ultimus, that killed the 12 girls. Father Brennan's records indicate that the sheet has been examined by dozens of scholars over the years, but none have been able to provide a complete translation or musical analysis. The hymn sheet seems to resist scholarly investigation. Father Brennan wrote, "Musicologists who attempt to analyze its notation report that the symbols appear to shift and change when observed closely. Linguists who try to translate the Latin text find that the words seem to rearrange themselves on the page. Most disturbing of all, several researchers have reported that they began to hear the melody in their minds while studying the sheet, and that this phantom music continued for days or weeks after they had finished their examination. Multiple attempts have been made to photograph or copy the hymn sheet, but all have ended in failure. Photographs come out blurred or distorted, and hand-copied transcriptions contain errors that seem to appear spontaneously. The sheet seems to exist in a state that defies reproduction, as if it were designed to prevent its dangerous contents from being widely disseminated. In the 1960s, the advent of modern recording technology led to renewed interest in the St. Cecilia's case. Dr. Pauline Harrows, a linguist from Yale University, gained permission to study the archived materials using new analytical techniques. Her 1968 paper, Acoustic Anomalies in Historical Musical Manuscripts, contains several groundbreaking discoveries. Using spectrographic analysis, she determined that the hymn sheet contained embedded information that was not visible to the naked eye. The spacing between notes and the thickness of the ink lines created patterns that, when analyzed mathematically, revealed additional layers of meaning. The hymn sheet is not simply a piece of music, Dr. Harrows concluded. It is a complex information storage device that contains multiple levels of encoded data. The visible musical notation is only the surface layer. Beneath it are mathematical formulas, acoustic principles, and what appear to be instructions for vocal techniques that could produce dangerous physiological effects. Dr. Harrow's research also revealed that the Latin text of the hymn contained hidden messages. When certain letters were analyzed according to medieval cipher techniques, these hidden messages described the specific breathing patterns, vocal resonances, and harmonic relationships that would be necessary to perform the hymn successfully. The hidden instructions make clear that the hymn was designed to be performed only once, by singers who had been specifically trained to handle its effects. Dr. Harrows noted, "The text warns that attempting to sing the hymn without proper preparation will result in the voice becoming one with the melody, the singer becoming the song." The 12 girls at St. Cecilia's School were not victims of an accident. They were intentionally sacrificed to preserve this dangerous musical knowledge. Despite the demolition of St. Cecilia's School and the passage of more than a century, phenomena related to the case continue to manifest. The former site of the school remains empty, and local residents report that the area still exhibits unusual acoustic properties. In 1975, a group of paranormal investigators attempted to document the lingering effects of the school's presence. Using modern sound recording equipment, they captured evidence of phantom music that seemed to emanate from the empty ground where the chapel had once stood. The recordings when analyzed by audio engineers, revealed something remarkable. The phantom music contained the same harmonic structures as the original hymn sheet, but played at frequencies that were barely audible to human hearing. The investigators concluded that the site itself had somehow been permanently altered by the events of 1873, becoming a kind of acoustic recording that continued to play the fatal hymn. The land where St. Cecilia's school once stood has become a kind of musical instrument, noted Dr. Richard Sterling, a physicist who analyzed the recordings. The soil, the rocks, even the vegetation seemed to have been tuned to resonate with the frequencies that were used in the original experiment. The site continues to produce the sounds that killed the 12 girls, but at levels that are just below the threshold of human perception. The cemetery where the girls are buried continues to be a site of unexplained phenomena. Visitors report that the graves seem to respond to music. Flowers placed on the burial sites will arrange themselves in different patterns depending on what songs are played nearby. Some visitors have reported hearing the girls' voices harmonizing with live music, creating impromptu choral arrangements that seem to come from beyond the grave. The case of St. Cecilia's School has had far-reaching implications for our understanding of the relationship between music and human consciousness. The incident has been studied by psychologists, neurologists, and acoustics experts, all attempting to understand how sound can be used to produce such dramatic effects on the human mind and body. Dr. Maria Santos, a neuropsychologist at Johns Hopkins University, has spent decades studying the St. Cecilia's case and similar incidents. Her research has revealed that certain combinations of musical frequencies can indeed produce profound alterations in human consciousness, including states that closely resemble what witnesses described in the 12 girls. The human brain is essentially an electrical organ that operates through rhythmic patterns. Dr. Santos explains, when exposed to specific acoustic frequencies, these patterns can be disrupted or enhanced in ways that produce altered states of consciousness. The techniques used at St. Cecilia's School appear to have been designed to push these alterations to their absolute limits. Dr. Santos' research has also revealed that the effects of exposure to these dangerous frequencies can be permanent. Several researchers who have studied the St. Cecilia's materials have reported lasting changes in their perception of music and sound. Some have developed perfect pitch, while others have lost the ability to enjoy conventional music, claiming that it sounds flat or incomplete compared to what they experienced during their research. The case of St. Cecilia's School represents a cautionary tale about the power of sound to alter human consciousness. Dr. Santos concludes, the techniques developed by the school's mysterious founders were not simply educational tools, they were methods of permanently altering the neurological structure of the human brain. The 12 girls who died were not just victims of a tragic accident, they were test subjects in an experiment that fundamentally changed what they were as human beings. Despite more than a century of investigation, many questions about St. Cecilia's School remain unanswered. The true identity of Mother Adela and the other sisters has never been established. The source of the school's funding remains unknown. Most importantly, the location of the organization responsible for the school's establishment has never been discovered. In 1989, investigative journalist David Kellerman published The Singing Dead, a comprehensive investigation into the St. Cecilia's case. His research revealed tantalizing clues about the broader network of institutions that may have been connected to the school. The evidence suggests that St. Cecilia's School was not an isolated institution, but part of a network of similar facilities that have operated throughout history. Kellerman wrote, I have found records of schools, convents, and musical academies in various countries that share disturbing similarities with St. Cecilia's. All were established by mysterious benefactors, all focused on advanced musical training, and all were eventually abandoned under circumstances that their surrounding communities preferred to forget. Kellerman's investigation revealed that similar institutions may have operated in remote areas of Scotland, Bavaria, and the mountains of Peru. In each case, the institutions attracted students with exceptional musical ability. subjected them to intensive training in unconventional vocal techniques, and ultimately disappeared, leaving behind only rumors and unexplained phenomena. The pattern suggests that we are dealing with a persistent organization that has been conducting these experiments for centuries, Kellerman concluded. This organization appears to be dedicated to the belief that human consciousness can be permanently altered through the use of sound. They establish schools and academies as cover for their research, recruit subjects with specific vocal abilities, and conduct experiments that push the boundaries of human survival. The tragedy of St. Cecilia's School has left a lasting impact on the fields of music education, acoustic research, and our understanding of the relationship between sound and consciousness. The case has become a touchstone for researchers studying the potentially dangerous effects of certain musical practices. The incident has also influenced popular culture, inspiring numerous works of fiction, documentaries, and academic papers. However, many of these works have focused on the supernatural aspects of the case while ignoring the scientific evidence that suggests the girls' deaths were the result of deliberate experimentation rather than paranormal phenomena. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, a professor of music therapy at the University of Pennsylvania, has argued that the St. Cecilia's case should be understood as a cautionary tale about the ethical boundaries of musical research. The tragedy of St. Cecilia's School demonstrates what can happen when the pursuit of musical knowledge is divorced from concern for human welfare. She writes, "The 12 girls who died were victims of researchers who viewed them as experimental subjects rather than human beings." The case has also had practical implications for music education. Many institutions now include warnings about the potential dangers of certain vocal techniques in their curricula, and there are established protocols for identifying students who may be experiencing adverse effects from intensive musical training. The St. Cecilia's case has taught us that music is not simply an art form. It is a powerful technology that can be used to alter human consciousness, notes Dr. Hawthorne. With this power comes responsibility. We must ensure that our pursuit of musical knowledge never again leads to the kind of tragedy that occurred in Whitbridge. Despite decades of investigation, many aspects of the St. Cecilia's case remain mysterious. The true nature of the organization behind the school, the ultimate fate of Mother Adela and the other sisters, and the current location of the dangerous musical knowledge they possessed are all unknown. Some researchers believe that the organization responsible for St. Cecilia's School may still exist, continuing their experiments in other locations around the world. Reports of mysterious musical institutions, unexplained vocal phenomena, and groups of singers who die under suspicious circumstances continue to surface, suggesting that the work begun at St. Cecilia's may be ongoing. Dr. Thomas Brennan, a contemporary researcher who has spent years studying the case, believes that the organization operates according to a long-term plan that spans centuries. The evidence suggests that St. Cecilia's School was not an isolated experiment, but part of a systematic investigation into the limits of human vocal ability. He argues, the organization behind the school appears to be working toward some ultimate goal that requires the sacrifice of human subjects. The hymn sheet that killed the 12 girls remains in the archives of St. Elizabeth Seminary, still defying attempts at complete analysis or reproduction. Researchers who have studied it report that it seems to contain information that goes beyond simple musical notation, possibly including instructions for vocal techniques that could produce effects even more dramatic than those witnessed at St. Cecilia's. The hymn sheet represents a form of musical knowledge that is fundamentally different from anything in our conventional understanding, notes Dr. Brennan. It suggests that there are aspects of sound and music that we have yet to discover, and that the organization behind St. Cecilia's School may possess scientific knowledge that is centuries ahead of our current understanding. In the spring of 2024, construction workers renovating the old Whitbridge Town Hall made a discovery that would reignite interest in the St. Cecilia's case. Behind a false wall in the basement, they uncovered a hidden chamber containing hundreds of documents, photographs, and musical manuscripts dating back to the 1800s. The documents revealed the existence of what the organization called the Consortium of Harmonic Sciences, a secretive group of researchers, musicians, and wealthy patrons who had been conducting experiments with sound and human consciousness for over 2 centuries. St. Cecilia's School was merely one of dozens of facilities they had operated across the globe. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic musicologist who led the analysis of the discovered materials, made a chilling revelation. The documents show that the deaths at St. Cecilia's were not a failure of their experiment, but its intended outcome. The 12 girls were specifically selected and trained to achieve what the consortium called harmonic transcendence, a state they believed would allow them to access knowledge beyond human comprehension. Among the most disturbing finds was a detailed map showing the locations of other consortium facilities, some of which appeared to still be active. The map included coordinates for sites in remote areas of Tibet, the Amazon rainforest, and the Australian outback, places where unusual acoustic phenomena and unexplained disappearances had been reported for decades. The discovery in Whitbridge prompted an international investigation, but the results were deeply troubling. Several of the facilities marked on the consortium's map were found to be operational, disguised as music schools, spiritual retreats, or research centers. At each location, investigators found evidence of the same dangerous vocal techniques that had been practiced at St. Cecilia's. Most alarming was the discovery that the consortium had been using modern technology to amplify their experiments. High-tech recording equipment, computer-aided vocal analysis, and even experimental neural interfaces were being used to push their research to new extremes. They're not just studying the effects of dangerous vocal techniques anymore, warned Dr. Brennan, who had been consulted on the investigation. They're trying to weaponize them. The evidence suggests they're developing ways to use sound to control human behavior on a massive scale. The investigation revealed that the consortium had infiltrated legitimate institutions, placing their agents in universities, recording studios, and even government agencies. Their ultimate goal, according to intercepted communications, was to create what they called the Great Resonance, a worldwide acoustic event that would fundamentally alter human consciousness. In the deepest part of the Whitbridge archive, investigators found the consortium's most closely guarded secret, a musical composition they called the Unfinished Symphony. The piece was written in the same mysterious notation as the hymn sheet that had killed the St. Cecilia's girls, but it was far more complex and extensive. According to the accompanying documentation, the symphony was designed to be performed by exactly 140 specially trained voices, 12 groups of 12 singers, each group representing a different harmonic frequency of human consciousness. The piece was intended to be the culmination of centuries of research, capable of opening what the consortium termed the acoustic gateway to transcendence. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the St. Cecilia's girls had been training to perform just one movement of this larger work. Their deaths had provided the consortium with crucial data about the limits of human vocal physiology, information they had used to refine their techniques for the remaining movements. The horror of St. Cecilia's becomes even more profound when you realize it was just a test run, Dr. Chen explained. Those 12 girls died to help perfect a weapon that could potentially affect millions of people. The investigation into the Consortium of Harmonic Sciences remains ongoing, but progress has been slow. The organization's centuries of experience in operating in secrecy have made them extremely difficult to track. For every facility that is discovered and shut down, 2 more seem to appear in different locations. Dr. Hawthorne established the St. Cecilia's Foundation, dedicated to monitoring suspicious musical activities and protecting potential victims. The foundation maintains a network of researchers, musicians, and law enforcement officials who watch for signs of consortium activity. The girls of St. Cecilia's School will not have died in vain. If we can prevent others from suffering the same fate, Dr. Hawthorne stated at the Foundation's inaugural meeting, we must remain vigilant. The consortium's work continues, and they are closer than ever to completing their unfinished symphony in Whitbridge. The ruins of St. Cecilia's School still stand, now surrounded by a high fence and warning signs. Local residents report that on certain nights, when the wind is just right, they can still hear the faint echo of 12 young voices singing in perfect, haunting harmony. The hymn sheet remains in the archives of St. Elizabeth Seminary, studied but never performed. Some researchers believe it contains additional secrets yet to be discovered. Others argue it should be destroyed before it can cause any more harm. As for the consortium, their current activities remain largely unknown. But somewhere in the world, in hidden facilities and secret schools, their work continues. The pursuit of harmonic transcendence goes on, and the shadow of St. Cecilia's school grows longer with each passing year. The story of St. Cecilia's school is not one of the past, but of the present and perhaps, most terrifyingly, of the future. For in the end, the 12 girls who died in that chapel did not mark the conclusion of a tragedy, but the beginning of something far more sinister. Their voices may have been silenced, but their echo reverberates still, a warning that few have heard and fewer still have heeded. The consortium of harmonic sciences waits, watches, and prepares for the day when their unfinished symphony will finally be complete.